Quick disclaimer before the start of the video, this is a spiritual successor to my original Resident Evil 4 essay that I made back in January of last year. I'm going to talk about a lot of the same topics that I touched on last time, so it's not required that you watch that first, but it is recommended, because you should watch my videos. Thank you. Mwah.
This time, it can be different. It has to.
Resident Evil 4 is a game that needs no introduction. Even 21 years after launch, the original is still considered an extremely innovative and influential game, not just in the Resident Evil series, but countless other games going forward. Games like The Last of Us, Uncharted, and Dead Space have all been influenced by Resident Evil 4 in some form or another, be it through its gameplay, design, or mechanics. But the story?
I've sent my right hand to dispose of you.
Your right hand comes off?
That's where OG4, in my opinion, ends up falling a little flat. Of course, the Resident Evil series, particularly in its infancy, is known for its schlockiness and camp that defined that era of games due to what seems like the prioritization of gameplay experience over a cohesive plot. While there is time and place for any good schlocky game, you can just boot up, pick up the controller, and turn your brain off, there's a point where it's clear that a game wants the player to care about its story and characters, but it forgets to actually put in the effort to make them care. And Serra, the focus of this analysis, falls victim to this pattern. Leon S. Kennedy, and by extent the player, first meet Luis when the two of them wake up chained together after being captured by the infected townsfolk. During this cutscene, Luis tells Leon that he used to be a police officer in Madrid before quitting, and that he may know a thing or two about the Raccoon City incident, seemingly setting up for something, and yet neither of these things are ever mentioned again. The only thing that remains consistent about him from this scene onwards is that Luis presents himself as calm, collected, and suave, contrasting with the fact that both of them are in immediate danger, with the game making one thing abundantly clear: the player should not trust Luis. A player's mind might start wondering if Luis has ulterior motives, maybe even expecting a betrayal later on, but despite that setup, the game never delivers on it whatsoever. All he seems to do is show up periodically, say something cryptic like how helping Leon and Ashley makes him feel better, but then leaves before he can really contribute anything. He doesn't get any sort of substantial character development, and only gets a whopping 9 minutes of screen time before getting killed off by Sadler, and is promptly written out of the game entirely. To add insult to injury, the segment immediately following Luis's death has Leon essentially stepping over his corpse while he tries to rescue Ashley, which just goes to show how little his addition to the story really meant in the grand scheme of things. Without any actual growth as a character, Luis ends up playing into the Latin lover stereotype like so many other characters such as Fernando Martinez from Grand Theft Auto 3 in 2001 and Santiago from Fallout New Vegas in 2010. The decision to portray Hispanic characters, male characters in particular, as these sensual and sexually dangerous womanizers is still incredibly prominent in not just video games but TV shows, books, and movies as well. And why is that? The website TV Tropes, my nemesis, claims that the reason why the stock character is still so prevalent is because, quote, Latin culture is exotic enough to be alluring but distinctly Western and predominantly Christian. There's enough cultural overlap to not require adjusting to a completely different set of values, end quote. To an American audience, it's different enough that we can fetishize it, but not too different that we end up being afraid of it for being too, quote-unquote, other. But once again, the Latin lover is a stock character based on the US's surface-level expectations of how entire countries of people are supposed to look and act. Latin lovers are not meant to be anything more than just that, surface level, and will undoubtedly lack any sort of depth as a result. Such is the case for Luis in OG4, since, along with him embodying this stock character, his presence also ends up contributing to the sexualization of the two female characters in the game, especially Ashley, through the line in which he says that, insert quote, because I don't want to... I respect women.
Women! President's equipped his daughter with ballistics, too.
So for almost 2 decades, Luis's lasting legacy was just being that creep from Resident Evil 4. 18 years later, the remake for Resident Evil 4 released on March 24, 2023, to much fanfare. The game ended up drastically changing the visuals, setting, and story, and of these changes, Luis was the most affected by far, getting a complete overhaul in terms of his design and backstory. In this game, Leon meets Luis much in the same way as he did in the original, though this time it becomes evident that it is in what remains of his childhood home, and marks the start of this game's amazing environmental storytelling. The house, listed on the in-game map as the Lakeside Settlement, is visibly burnt, with a massive hole in the roof. This place has not been touched in a very long time. But despite that, this house still feels lived in, or like somebody has been there recently, judging by the old tins of food scattered all over the place, and the fact that there are a bunch of miscellaneous test tubes and beakers on the desk near the front of the house, which feels extremely out of place. On this desk, the player can find a photo of a young boy with his grandfather placed next to the test tubes, as if whoever was here last had been looking at it while they were working. The game's progression is designed in a way to make the player notice this, as the player will walk into the room and acknowledge the lab equipment first, and then pick up the photo, drawing a subconscious correlation between the two of them. The remainder of this first encounter with Luis remains similar to the original. However, Leon is able to return to the cabin a little while later, revealing several new secrets that weren't originally there. Upon returning to the cabin during Chapter 4 and going down to the basement, the player is able to find the old man's journal in the exact same spot where Leon initially found Luis in the bag, like he was reading it before he was captured. The journal details the life of a grandfather and his grandson living in the valley, the boy being described as intelligent beyond his years and infatuated by the novel Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. As the journal goes on, however, it reveals that while out on a hunt, the old man was attacked and subsequently bitten by a rabid wolf, becoming infected with Las Plagas as a result. My body moves on its own, and I can hear voices inside my head. Am I going mad? I can't die here and leave the boy behind. Dear God, please protect him. Players reading this note will not immediately make the connection that Luis is the boy mentioned. As such, reading it creates this sort of delayed gratification for them that only plays off if they, once again, backtrack to a previously visited location. In this case, the attic of the village chief's manor, only accessible upon returning with Ashley for an optional side mission. This narrative decision ends up rewarding players for their exploration more so than the original did, giving them a sense of accomplishment that they discovered a secret, and in turn, more lore about a character that, for all intents and purposes, we didn't really know much about. When entering the attic, the player finds a note presumably written by Mendez, the village chief, which describes what happened to the old man after he became infected. The village set the cabin ablaze with the old man still inside, and the young boy unable to do anything but watch. It was a terrible night. Everyone stood around the cabin and watched as it burned to the ground. The boy looked on without saying a word. Even as dawn broke, he didn't move a muscle. The next day, he was gone. Next to the note is an antique camera along with a copy of the picture found inside the cabin, though this version is unframed. When flipped over, it reveals that the picture is labeled as the Navarro family 1981. Eagle-eyed players may make the connection and check the report Hunnigan had sent Leon earlier, a file many players end up overlooking, which shows that Luis's full name is Luis Serra Navarro, with Navarro being his late mother's maiden name. As was in the original, Luis's appearances after his introduction are sparse and inconsistent up until Chapter 11, where Luis meets back up with him after defeating the Verdugo. This entire chapter, aside from the general progression and layout of the map, has been completely restructured to focus on Luis and his growing bond with Leon, as well as definitively proving that Luis was the boy mentioned in the notes from the village, with this line.
Then come, Sancho Panza! Let us rescue the Princess Dulcinea!
You gotta hurt yourself.
Throughout the game, Luis has been using several different nicknames to refer to Leon, from Amigo to Cowboy to Prince Charming. But it is at this point of the game where he finally settles on referring to Leon as Sancho more consistently, reference to Don Quixote's squire Sancho Panza. Though this choice creates a paradoxical situation, since up to this point, Leon is depicted as being much more of your standard knight than Luis. He is on a mission, his errantry, to save Ashley, the princess. Salazar even tauntingly refers to Leon as a gallant knight on multiple occasions. And yet, Luis still decides to insert Leon into the role of Sancho Panza, despite himself taking on the more squirely role from a narrative standpoint. Later on, Luis describes himself as a ladies' man, which is a callback to a line he had in the original.
And who might you be?
Me llamo Luis Serra. I used to be a cop in Madrid. But now I'm just a good-for-nothing guy who happens to be quite a ladies' man.
I'm just an average guy who happens to be quite the ladies' man.
but even this manages to tie back into Don Quixote through Lothario, a character in the meta-story of the ill-advised curiosity from part 1 of the book, who is noted as being one of, if not the first, examples of these stock ladies' man characters in literature. It's the start of a concerning pattern of Luis seemingly putting himself in the role of shallow stock characters for the sake of self-preservation, which brings us to an important, if controversial, part of Luis, both in-game and his reception from fans: his race. Okay, I had to take a break from recording to go eat an applesauce because I was super lightheaded, but I'm back now. Luis's race is an extremely contentious topic within the fandom, and I myself am certainly not qualified to give a definitive answer on whether Luis is white or not. But a lot of the things about him as a character end up being reflective of the struggles people of color faced during the early 2000s when this game was set, and continue to face. It is immediately noticeable that Luis has much darker skin than the albeit possessed villagers in Valdelobos, that he likely would have grown up around, making him an outlier, even if just by proxy. It's mentioned in many of the notes found around the village that even before Los Iluminados took it and its inhabitants over, Valdelobos was still an incredibly isolated and devoutly Catholic place that looked down on any sort of outsider. While Luis's father is never discussed and is likely out of the picture, it is stated that his mother died while giving birth to him. Historically speaking, the Catholic Church has not had the greatest reputation with its treatment of children born out of wedlock or their mothers, notably confining many of those considered fallen women to what were essentially labor prisons known as the Magdalene Laundries. Needless to say, outside of his relationship with his grandfather and Mendez, Luis was probably not a well-liked member of his community for these reasons, and this may be why he and his grandfather were so secluded from the main village area. However, it should be stated that before he himself became infected, Mendez seemed to have been more welcoming to outsiders. In the Village Records Volume 2 file, he writes that he opened up the village to allow in those from outside. Quote, "We have prospered and the people are happier," end quote. Though this is notably after Luis had already left, and likely what caused Los Iluminados to rampage the village. As mentioned previously, Luis's original self was heavily influenced by negative stereotypes, and while Remake Luis still appears to embody many of the defining traits of the Latin lover by being a suave, self-proclaimed ladies' man from a surface-level glance at him, time and time again this is shown to be a mask Luis is putting on, and one that most other characters he interacts with can see right through. All of this considered, it becomes extremely likely that Luis is playing into these often racialized stereotypes that the general public have towards people that look like him as a way of self-preservation, while also making himself seem more palatable, for lack of a better term, for the white American characters in Leon and Ashley. On a meta level, Luis continues to take the brunt of the Phantom's racialized discourse. When Luis's new appearance was first revealed in October of 2022, fans were initially divided on it, and were quick to draw comparisons to him and WWE fighter Seth Rollins, as well as calling him ugly, dirty, or that he looked like a drug dealer or a pimp. After the remake's release, a few outspoken players were even outraged at the drastic changes to Luis's role and appearance, and the removal of his ballistics line in the original, going so far as to review bomb the game for going woke, completely disregarding the rest of the game over what amounted to a few dialogue and character model changes. Last summer, I polled a small selection of people, mostly coming from websites such as Tumblr and YouTube, since those are the places where I'm most active online, on their opinion of Luis, either based on personal experiences playing either version of Resident Evil 4, or by their first impression of him for those who had never played the game before. As I predicted, most participants responded that they preferred Luis's updated design and backstory to what the original had to offer. However, there were still a few outliers who thought that he was, yes, ugly, dirty, or that he looked like a creep. And I do believe that there is a correlation between his appearance and these sorts of labels that get placed on him by fans and outsiders alike. Online and fandom spaces are often reflections of real life. And as we've started seeing a shift towards a more right-leaning and conservative mindset in politics, many social media sites with active fandom communities like TikTok, Instagram, and especially Twitter have seen a concerning uptick in casual racism, xenophobia, and dog whistles, even if users don't realize they're even using them in the first place. As a result, non-white characters end up being held to a higher standard of morality or expectations than characters who are, more so than before. On top of that, in the US, I have noticed that there is a certain implicit bias that has become more and more apparent as a consequence of our current political climate. That being one where the general audience will see a brown, Spanish-speaking character and will be more likely to assume that the stereotypes that have been perpetuated in media for as long as it has are true. So, to circle back to the idea of widespread cultural stereotypes being present in not just fandom spaces, but the source material as well, one must consider how Resident Evil 4 being set in Spain, specifically, might have affected players' understanding of its setting, plot, and characters. Spain is an incredibly culturally diverse country due to its deep history of Romantic, Islamic, and Germanic influence, among many others. We can even see evidence of the same influence occurring in Resident Evil 4 through the many everyday objects found throughout Villalobos, specifically in Luis's house, ironically enough, that I find are reminiscent of similar real-world ceramics from Al-Andalus, the name for the Iberian Peninsula when it was under Islamic rule from the 8th to 15th century. Despite that, it, along with other European countries, tend to be seen as this homogenized utopian society, regardless of the fact that Europe is a continent of 50 countries, each with their own culture, history, and way of living unique to them. So one must ask why these overgeneralizations occur to the point where they begin to influence the content we consume. Oftentimes, it comes as a result of an outsider, one who lacks knowledge on the culture they are engaging with, looking in. In the case of video games, when a game is set in a real-world location, that location is still being shown through a fantastical lens and will obviously not be a one-for-one replica of the actual location. There may be players whose first experience learning anything about these places are through the games they play, but all that does is form the basis of their understanding of it without them taking the time to think about what the game might say about the location or its people. That isn't to say that it should be solely the player's responsibility, nor that all video games need to be 100% accurate in what they are depicting. Rather, we should consider the creator's biases alongside it. As I discussed in the very beginning of this essay, game developers earlier on tended to focus on creating a game that was fun to play and control, as opposed to one that told a cohesive story. When choosing a location to set a game, their only reason why they chose it in the first place would be that it just looked cool, and it wasn't any deeper than that, which is a completely rational path to take when designing a video game. It becomes a problem, though, when it's clear that the creators have not researched the culture they are trying to depict and instead fall back on stereotypes or preconceived notions that they may have. As is the case for the original Resident Evil 4, where even if Luis was completely revamped for the remake, people who played the original may take their experiences of the old Luis and project them onto this new version. It's easy to see how important Luis's culture and heritage is to him through the way he presents himself in the scenes he appears in. One example being the very first scene in Separate Ways, when Luis finds himself locked in one of the cells in the castle's dungeon. While waiting for Ada to come save him, he begins performing a dance for the corpse that's locked in with him. While players may pick up that Luis is flamenco dancing, this game is set in Spain after all, the particular style most closely resembles the seguidilla, a style of dance noted for its use of clapping, stomping, and vocalizations that is notorious for the amount of effort it takes in order to actually perform it correctly. Seguidillas are an offshoot of the cante jondo, and is a deeply somber style used to convey a sense of grief or mourning, as it originated from Romani people living in Spain and is linked to their marginalization. This aspect of mourning and marginalization is very fitting for Luis as a character, all things considered, yet it still feels so bizarre to break out into song and dance in the middle of the prison. But he does it anyway. Luis choosing this specific dance may seem out of place at first, as well. Why would he perform a dance associated with even more death and despair when he's already stuck in a place that's full of it? What is he even mourning? A viewer can take this either one of two ways, the first being that it's used as a way to symbolize everything in Luis's life up to this point. He's lost everything he's ever held dear to him. He never knew his parents, he lost his grandfather, his home, and has watched as both Umbrella and his hometown crumble before him because of his own actions. And now he's stuck in the very place where it all began, Villalobos. On the other hand, one could also view this as a way for the game to foreshadow the looming threat of his own death. The corpse he performs this dance for is positioned in an eerily similar way to the way Luis will end up dying in. He even says,
Parece que me toca bailar, hermano.
As if he's preemptively mourning himself. As Separate Ways continues, the player will pick up on the stark differences between the way that Luis interacts with Leon versus the way he interacts with Ada. This is most obvious through their calls to each other, where Luis will actively make himself look better when calling Leon. Players can also see this through the way Luis seems to blindly trust Ada because he knows that she is his only definitive way out of here. It's more of a transactional relationship, with Luis's line of,
You can work for the devil for all I care. As long as you get me out of here.
serving as irrefutable evidence for this. I believe that this is why Luis ends up acting more rambunctious and goofy, more like himself around Ada, despite her chagrin. He allows himself to be nervous and upset because Ada already knows about what Luis has done in his past and doesn't bat an eye at it. So there's nothing at stake between them. To Ada, Luis is just another part of the mission to her, which isn't to say that she doesn't care about him, but more so in the way that she just has bigger things to worry about than the inner turmoil of a random Spaniard she just met. Circling back to the main game, over the course of Chapter 11, Leon and Luis's banter progressively grows less and less hostile for Leon, or cocky for Luis, exemplifying how they are slowly but surely beginning to trust one another. In fact, the two almost seem to switch places near the latter end of the chapter, with Leon being surprisingly more hopeful than he normally acts through their exchange after the bridge to a nearby elevator crumbles in front of them.
No way. Give me a break.
We can make it if we circle around. Come on.
Pain in my ass.
When the pair make it back to the elevator, Luis reveals that he had been working for Los Iluminados, and while he knows that helping Leon and Ashley doesn't make up for his past actions and the harm he inadvertently caused, he still doesn't want anybody else to get hurt. Despite the shocking reveal, Leon doesn't react with the hostility one might expect from him. Instead, he offers his trust to Luis by telling him,
In that case, you better get serious.
it's a huge step forward in their relationship, but one that Luis may not have seen coming, which may be why he brushes it off with his line that once again compares Leon to Sancho Panza. But nothing good can last forever, and what could have easily been the start of a budding relationship is cut short when Luis is stabbed by Leon's old mentor turned Sadler's lackey, Jack Krauser. The game uses this scene as a way to defy player expectations. It would be easy to assume that Luis would immediately be considered dead as soon as he hits the floor, like he did in the original. But he uses the very last of his energy to shoot at Krauser and save Leon. I previously described this scene as the bookends of Leon and Luis's story. The relationship began with Leon saving Luis's life, and now it ends with Luis returning the favor. He has spent this entire chapter breaking free of this ladies' man persona he's created for himself, but him saying,
And such a loss to the ladies of the world.
feels like he is reverting back into it, believing that he still hasn't done enough to warrant forgiveness and is being punished for his Quixoticism, and as such, forces himself to ask,
But now, eh? What do you think, Leon? People can change, right?
We have already established that Luis Serra is an incredibly chaotic character. One could even consider this game and Luis's story to be a modern retelling of the novel. Quixoticism can be defined as the pursuit of overly ambitious or impractically chivalrous ideas that are doomed to fail, and there are countless instances where a player can apply this to Luis's actions throughout the game, to the point where it seems as if Luis is almost experiencing divine punishment for his own chaotic desires. Like Luis, Don Quixote's name, his real name at least, is also a point of interest. In the very first chapter of the novel, Cervantes claims that Don Quixote's real last name is Quijada, shortly after maintaining that, quote, his real name must undoubtedly have been Quijada with an I, and then claims that it's Quijana a few chapters later in chapter 5. Outside of these first few chapters, Don Quixote's true name continues to change form throughout the book as well. In Spanish, the suffix a is typically associated with femininity, with some exceptions. While women may bear the feminine form of their family's name, as is the case for Quixote's niece, Antonio Quijana, it would be considered strange for a man to do so when this book was written in the early 17th century. And so, this contrasts the end of the novel, in which he reveals that his true identity is Alonso Quijano, his name having seemingly been masculinized over the course of his errantry. This ties back to the alias of Don Quixote, which uses the gender-neutral suffix a, the name now taking the role of what John G. Weiger, author of The Individuated Self, describes as, quote, an asexual self-baptism, a metaphorical cleansing of Quixote's past and the expectations placed on him as a consequence of hegemonic masculinity, so to speak. Along with that, the word Quixote is Spanish for cuisses, the armor that covers and protects the thighs. In literature, it's an incredibly common occurrence to use the thighs and surrounding anatomy as a euphemism for the sexual center of the human body, and Don Quixote is no exception. Quote, Don Quixote's very name suggests sexuality, and the fact that Cervantes allows the recently turned knight to so name himself would suggest the notion that our hero is trying to cover and protect his sexuality. That is not to say that he is attempting to deny his masculinity, but that his manliness will assert itself on the battlefield of knighthood, rather than in that other possible assertion of manhood, namely, sexual intercourse, end quote. Weiger claims that Don Quixote's relationship to his own sexuality is one of evasion and denial. He portrays himself as a chaste knight who seeks to prove himself through his own knightly adventure, saving himself for his lady, his Dulcinea, whom he has put on so high of a pedestal that she has become unattainable. Likewise, Luis repeatedly denies himself of what he wants, which is forgiveness and trust, yet still obtains through, ironically, a relationship with another man, though not explicitly a romantic or sexual one. As a result, Luis's Dulcinea is not Ashley in this case, like he may imply, but is instead a cleansing of his past sins that he feels he does not deserve, and thus he too believes is just out of his reach, like his idol before him. At her core, Princess Dulcinea serves as the embodiment of the impossible dream. Her unattainability, along with Don Quixote's subsequent disillusionment from her near the end of Part 2, represents Quixoticism in its truest form, and the consequences of it. By the end of the novel, Sancho inherits Don Quixote's worldview, being Quixoticized in return, and desperately tries to reignite his master's love for being a knight, but to no avail. Quote, Dulcinea has been converted into Sancho's ideal, an ideal on a different plane and with a different set of reference points, end quote. We see this in Resident Evil 4 too. When Luis dies, Leon allows him to indulge in his Quixoticism, thus Leon becoming Quixotic himself. Leon's Quixoticism presents itself as his belief that this time has to be different, a belief he carries with him through the rest of the game. I would argue that Don Quixote is not mad so much as he is human. He is a man blinded by his own delusions of grandeur and his need to prove himself worthy of his masculinity. Weiger agrees with me, claiming that, quote, It is for such reasons that I cannot accept Don Quixote's insanity, nor can I accept him as a saint. I would stress instead his humanity, ranging from all the errors and misconceptions which limit human understanding, to the God-given attributes which allows those with sufficient wit and motivation to come to know better. The world in which humans live and how that world relates to any more lasting truths that may be discoverable. And yet, such people can discover themselves playing the idiot before a jury of sober eyes, end quote. The same goes for Luis. For as much bad as he's done in the past, he still deliberately goes out of his way to right both his wrongs as well as the wrongs of others. Despite that, most interactions the player will have with him will have him acting as the comedic relief character, playing into stereotypes in order to hide behind a mask and skewing the player base's perception of him as a way of protecting himself through a metatextual sense. And judging by my experience in the fandom, he is purposefully playing the idiot in front of a jury of sober eyes, just as Weiger said. While Luis might be dead, his presence is still very much felt, especially as the game takes Leon to the island. So much of this section reeks of him, and he even manages to save Leon and Ashley's lives again from beyond the grave, via the Plagas removal machine he built during his tenure working as a researcher for Los Illuminados, to the point where the two of them dedicate everything they do from that point on to Luis. They're alive thanks to him. As players, we continue to learn more about him through yet more notes as well, particularly those found in his secret laboratory, many of which show us what Luis was like when he was still under control of the cult. In the Sadler's Animus file on one of his computers, we can see that he is beginning to become disillusioned with his teachings, while he is tasked to research the Amber. But I know how Sadler and the others have oppressed the people of this island for generations. I know how he treats them. That's no way to live, and because of that, I won't let it happen. Animus has two meanings, the first being to show hostility or ill will towards someone or something. Meanwhile, the second defines a motivation to do something. Both of these definitions make sense considering the situation Luis has found himself in. Sadler is motivated to spread Las Plagas and its religion across the globe until everyone is forced to bend to its will. On the other hand, Luis could be referring to himself as Sadler's Animus. In many other notes, especially those written by the head researcher for Los Illuminados and presumably Luis's friend, Anabel Garcia Escudero, it is said that Sadler hates Luis and wants him gone. That's why he orders Krauser to kill him, after all. Because of that, Luis knows that the clock is ticking for him to escape the cult's grasp and leave this place behind. He has to act before it's too late. This is what leads him to helping Ada. But he believes that he can't fully trust her either, seeing this as yet another situation where he has to sweet talk to keep himself safe. He has to, for the world's sake. He treats sweet talking like it would be a life or death scenario if he didn't. And maybe he believes that to be true, knowing everything we do about him. But it all feels a little Quixotic in a way, making it seem like the fate of the world is resting on his shoulders. In some ways, it is true. Luis believes himself to be a modern-day Don Quixote, a righter of wrongs, an undoer of injustices, whether those be his wrongs or the wrongs of someone else. It's why he seems so hell-bent on being able to help Leon, being more open about it to Ada, who we have established he can be more of himself around. Being able to do good is all he can think of as he succumbs to his injuries, calling Ada to thank her for
Thank you for the chance to do good again.
Both Leon and Ada have their own respective instances near the end of their campaigns in which they refer back to Luis. He haunts the narrative in every sense of the word. Dead or alive, Luis is shown from a very unique point of view compared to other characters in the game. Throughout the main story, and separate ways, the player is given control of Leon, Ashley, and Ada at some point. Players are able to see how all three of them interact with the environment, enemies, or other NPCs, and in turn, are able to project onto them. Even Ada, who's meant to serve as this mysterious character who appears from out of the blue in the base game, has some of that mystique removed when we play as her and see where she ended up after the original cutscene would have just ended. Luis never gets something like that outside of him accompanying Leon in Chapter 11, but that still cannot replace the feeling of relatability and understanding that we would have gotten had we been able to play as him. And so there remains a certain degree of separation between Luis and the player. He's keeping both the characters he interacts with and the player at arm's length. The question still remains of what makes Luis a compelling character, if, when all is said and done, he wasn't that notable of a character to begin with, in the original at least. As I've stated multiple times throughout this essay, at the time of the original Resident Evil 4's release, the series was not focused on plot. It wasn't until the poor reception following Resident Evil 6 that Capcom seemed to pull back and rethink their approach, which led to Resident Evil 7's success. You can tangibly see the way each subsequent game progressively begins to focus more and more on its story, and the ways in which it continues to flesh out characters, both old and new, until we reach Resident Evil 4's Remake. Even still, the storytelling of most Resident Evil games continues to not be that nuanced. Not bad, per se, but rather that there remains clearly defined stakes the characters must take on that do not make them question their morals. You play as the good guy. It has never been any more complex than that for the past 30 years this series has been running for. This is what allows for Luis to make such an impact on the game's story. Here, you have a character whose very existence goes against this black and white morality the series has built itself on. This is not a cartoonishly evil villain who wants to inject himself with his evil serum that turns him into a scary monster that the player is forced to defeat. This is a human being who has done bad but is still deserving of redemption because of his actions in the game. And so, when Luis dies, it serves as a way to continue breaking down the typical structure of these games' stories, because it's a moment that requires a conscious and deliberate sacrifice of the grudge that Leon has held against anything Umbrella-related for the past 6 years. Tumblr user Agony Crossbow puts this much more succinctly than I ever could. Quote, "In this moment, it doesn't matter that Luis is a former Umbrella researcher. It doesn't matter that the lighter is engraved with the Umbrella logo. It doesn't matter that Leon is aiding and participating in Luis smoking, something that Leon is personally against. None of that shit matters. Leon scoops up that lighter, flips open the lid, and lights Luis's cigarette for him, because what actually matters to Leon in this moment is opening his heart and reaching out to create a real connection with a dying man. This is the most humanity that any Resident Evil character has shown towards another. It's a moment where neither character speaks. It's so silent that you can hear the paper and the tobacco of the cigarette crackle beneath the flame. And Luis accepts the openness of Leon's heart by literally breathing it in. Resident Evil has never been, and probably will never be, more intimate or more human than this moment in this scene. It was something really special.
You were a fine knight, Don Quixote.
Well, that is the end of the video. As always, thank you very much for watching, and a very happy belated 3rd birthday to Resident Evil 4 Remake. This video was meant to come out on the 24th, but unfortunately that just did not come to fruition because of like my own circumstances of like juggling school and just working on this in my free time. I would also like to give a very special shout out and thanks to my friends Eric and Igor for just helping me with the process of the video, like in terms of researching and general support, as well as my art history professor who helped me out a lot with the specific part about Luis's culture, which I find really interesting. That is where the plates came from. Enjoy the plates. I hope you learn more about fucking Islamic plates. It's really great to talk about that. I bet you didn't expect a deep dive on Al-Andalusian plates. Going forward, I would like to continue making more of these like longer form video essays, as well as doing like my own stuff, just really doing whatever. I don't have a specific niche, but I do know that there will be more of these in the future, absolutely. There will also be more just random shit that I make, music videos, random stuff that I make with my characters, really any of it. And I really hope you continue supporting me over the next couple months. I've got some more essays in mind that I'd like to talk about, specifically about that guy over there, or girl. That is called foreshadowing.